Hey everybody, this is Liz with Augusta today, and I have someone who is a coworker right here in the room with me at Command Center. But this is Brad Draayer, and we have interviewed him before and told all his backstory with Augusta, but he's in a completely different role now. So, can you tell us who you are, kind of how you began with Augusta to bring you to where you are today, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me back, Liz. It's always good to be a part of the show. But yeah, I started back with Augusta. Oh boy, I think is it coming up on 7 years now.
It's
So
been a
yeah,
while, yep.
yeah. I started way back working in the field when Liz neighbor answered every email and answered every phone call that came in for all of Augusta Nation when it was all of one location. So so yeah, that goes back a little ways there. Um, but yeah, since then, I had worked in the field for a bit. Then I worked as an estimator for a bit, in the field with Mike, and did a spell, kind of running the P for P side of things and all that with Mike as well. And then finally, kind of what we had transitioned to, um, and where I'm still at currently is obviously getting kind of going with home service CPA here as well. And yeah, that's now and it's about a third year in that regard. And yeah, that really was just born out of, I used to leave and actually go do taxes elsewhere for January through April. And then for the franchisees, they would be able to get their QuickBooks done through Command Center, and then would always say, "Well, what about my taxes?" And for a while, we had always kind of given the answer to basically just go find a local CPA and kind of build that relationship, in that regard as well. But then, yeah, some folks didn't have the greatest of experiences, or they would, kind of try and work through it themselves their first year, and maybe not end up on not the most ideal path in terms of depreciation and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So after a little while, the light bulb kind of went off in that regard and said, hey, instead of Brad leaving to do taxes elsewhere and then franchisees kind of struggling with their taxes, why don't we kind of kill two birds with one stone and kind of get home service CPA going, for the tax side of things as well.
Excellent.
So
Does
yeah,
does does Mike own tax CPA, and then you're a contractor that's hired, or how does that work?
yep, yeah. So Mike owns home service CPA, and then I basically have my own, kind of tax practice, if you will, that's subcontracted from home service CPA as well. And yeah, that's I guess kind of similar to a lot of the other businesses that Mike owns in that regard as well. In that, yeah, basically he likes to have the equity piece kind of dialed in that regard, and kind of keep maintain flexibility with his options in that regard. So certainly happy to do profit sharing and all the rest of it and so forth like that as well. He has no issues with that. But yeah, so officially, yeah, it's a Mike owns it, and then it's a subcontract relationship on a legal basis from that
Hmm.
perspective.
When I look at you and your history at Augusta, the word that comes to mind most is the word loyal, and I think you're a very loyal person. Can you tell us in your mind from the very beginning what made you convinced that you should be a part of what Mike is doing?
Um, I think it was yeah. There's just kind of something about Mike that just kind of draws you in as well, right? Um, and seeing not only having the big stated goals, but also continually seeing progress, you know, um, toward those goals as well. And that things are changing, things are moving forward, and so forth in that regard as well. But certainly getting going. Yeah, I'd say really there was probably, I mean, two different stories, kind of jump to mind in that regard. But one was I actually go to church with the equipment dealer, that kind of handles Mike's Bellingham location out here in Washington, and a little while in, I had just kind of asked him generally. I said, hey, you know, I'm thinking about kind of joining up with Augusta. Like, what do you know about Mike? What do you know about them, kind of thing. And this was back when Mike was just the one location out
Mm-hmm.
here in Washington, right? And you would
Mm-hmm.
expect, just I didn't really expect much of an answer in that regard in terms of like, oh yeah, he's a good guy,
Mm-hmm.
like works hard, like you would probably, that's kind of the standard answer that I was expecting in that regard, right? But I asked the question, and then Josh, the guy that I'd asked, basically just kind of stopped. He said, Mike has a different way of looking at the world, but he's going to do big things. There's no doubt about it.
Wow.
Like that was like when your equipment dealer says that about you, it's like, okay, like there is something different there, right?
Right. Right.
And then so kind of that answer then provided that answer, and then also just kind of seeing how he operated, and like I said, the continual progress toward the goal once you're in the door in that regard. Kind of kept me going in that regard, just
Mm-hmm.
because hand up when I had joined. I had I wasn't convinced that it was necessarily going to be a long-term solution in that regard as well. I had been in a different accounting job previously and all that through nobody's fault really, didn't end on the best. It was a little bit of a stressful situation in that regard. Let's just phrase it that way. So after that kind of came to an end, then it was just kind of like, okay, you know what, like let's clear our head a little bit, get outside, work with our hands and all that. And coming in, I thought it might last a season or two, and then I'd kind of go back to the accounting world. But full disclosure, I don't know if I ever told you that or not, Liz, but that
Yeah,
was
and
additionally my mindset coming in. So
you said there were two things that come to mind, two stories. Do you remember the second one?
oh, then the other one was actually he's unfortunately no longer here anymore, but I think my second or third week here, after joining, I was on a project with Ben Silva for about a week or so. At that point, you're just kind of doing, a little bit of bullet edging and, maybe I think there was a small paver patio and all part of it and all that. And basically it was just kind of Ben and I, together, for about a week or so in that regard as well. And Ben he's maybe a little bit older than I am and all that, in that regard as well. But basically just, he didn't have any reason not to be honest with me in that regard, right? He's just kind of a straight shooter, and basically just, he too had a bunch of nothing but positive things to say about Mike as well. It's just kind of similar, kind of piggybacking off what the equipment dealer said in that regard. As well as just like, this dude just gets after it and, knows what he wants, and all that. And he'd, give you the shirt off his back if you needed to, kind of mentality and all that as well. So being able just to, spend a bit of time with Ben there as well, was kind of another one of those that like, okay, like this is more than just the, kind of the local landscape shop. It's more than mowing grass, right?
Yeah.
So if you can stick it out, then Mike is going to do big things, and wants the team to be a part of it. So
yeah. So over the years, has your feelings of loyalty and stick-to-itiveness and all of that, has that increased? Like, do you feel stronger about it where we've grown to today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think we're pushing 180 locations now. I want to say, right? In total. So I mean, it's definitely the proof is in the pudding in that regard.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of being able to see, just kind of see the growth and seeing the progress toward that goal in that regard as well. So I've definitely bought in. So
what does a typical day look like for you?
Gotcha. So it depends a little bit, and just in terms of the season and so forth like that, as well. Just because obviously tax season is, usually a bit busier in that regard, as well. So then, it's kind of more focusing on that side of things as well. But then, even outside of Augusta, we're up to about 24 bookkeeping clients, on the public side as well. And
Nice.
I do have some, help hired, or, for that with the bookkeeping side, and all that. So it's not necessarily like that's all on me per se in that regard, which is kind of nice as well. So yeah, but it's as Mike kind of likes to break it down, with the you have the sales, admin, and the operation side of things, and all that
Mm-hmm.
as well. So yeah, currently that's I'm kind of wearing those. Currently, I'm kind of wearing those three different hats, a bit, as
Mm-hmm.
well as kind of operationally, I still handle all the taxes and that side of things as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a kind of jumping around in that regard as well. But then yeah, and then even once I'm still working my way through some of the last of the tax returns, and
Mm-hmm.
all that, a bit as well in that regard. But yeah, even certainly once that's completed, I know Mike has a couple other kind of call it kind of special projects, or things that we'd like to get dialed in,
Mm-hmm.
on the finance side a bit more as well, that I can kind of be working through this summer in that regard as well. But yeah, so it's a little bit interesting though, just because I sometimes think about like I mean basically accounting firm and landscaping, and so forth. They initially seem like kind of very different businesses in that regard as well. But then what's interesting is kind of as home service CPA has gotten bigger in that regard, I kind of find myself fighting some of the same struggles a little bit in that regard, as well, just, in terms of, from, going through hiring your first employee,
Mm-hmm.
and then that employee does things a little bit differently than, how you would have done it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just like, oh, like, okay. And so like now we have to, kind of, work through that, or, kind of coach through that, just a little bit, and all
Mm-hmm.
that as well. As well as, yeah, one of the pieces I know I need to get better at. I mean, I think I have the, I think I kind of have the sales side dialed in and the
Mm-hmm.
operation side of taxes dialed in. But admittedly, where I could probably use a little bit of work would be, kind of more on that admin side of things,
Mm.
a little bit in that regard as well, and, kind of similar to, landscaping and so forth, as well. That the weakness doesn't necessarily show itself until you're about at capacity in that regard
Mm-hmm.
as well, right? That's where kind of where you
Mm-hmm.
start noticing it,
Yeah.
noticing things a bit more in that regard as well. So that's kind of definitely on my kind of high priority list here for, in the couple months going forward here, as we get off the back end of tax season as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of looking at kind of what the best route to go is, in terms of kind of solving that admin problem. And there's a couple of there's a couple of options there. There's a couple kind of different like accounting firms, CRMs and whatnot, that you could use a bit as well. And then I've been in contact with, I guess you can call it the Mike Callahan of
Mm-hmm.
accounting firms and all that as well, that
Mm-hmm.
can, kind of come in behind and, really get some systems implemented and so forth in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, yeah, sorry, off on a little bit
No.
of a tangent in that regard, but it's just interesting that, even though it's kind of a different line of business, it's still a lot of the same battles and a lot of the same growing, I guess, as
Yeah.
your clients are experiencing, which is, yeah, good and bad, right? So,
Mm-hmm. So personally, in what you're dealing with now, it's whatever your business constraint is yourself and your organization. Is that what you would say, to learn to do the admin?
correct. Yep. Yeah, and that's a blessing and a curse, right?
Yep.
Because it's yeah, I mean it's blessing, I guess, in terms of, because if since I know that the problem is myself, the good news is that it only takes myself to fix it in that
Yes.
regard, right? It's kind
Yes.
of you can control that outcome a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
um, you know so yeah, I mean that's, I guess, kind of the good part of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
in that regard. But at the same time, you still have to put in the work and do it
Mm-hmm.
in that regard as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you've been with Augusta for almost 7 years. I've been with Augusta for almost 10. And
Mhm.
throughout this time, our rules have changed a lot. But both of us have been in for the long haul and just really believed in the vision. And then as we have each new position we've been put in, it's like hot and heavy, and we have to learn so much more. And we're growing this whole franchise and everything from
Mhm.
scratch, from nothing. And we are all just learning a huge amount. How
Mhm.
does it feel to work for someone who is so intense and visionary and seeing the future? Would it be easier to just have a status quo job where you went to work and were an employee? Or do you thrive on this? Is it a lot of pressure? How do you feel about working for Mike Andes?
Yeah, overall, I'd say that it's a lot of fun. And yeah, realistically, I mean, I think trying to remember exactly how long ago it was now, but I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. I went through one of those analysis of of the like the strength finder,
Mm,
and so forth,
hmm.
like, kind of what you're naturally good at and all that
Yep.
as well. And yeah, I know my number one strength kind of coming out of that was basically adaptability in
Wow.
that regard as well, which is definitely uh, coming a bit useful, in that regard, as you kind of reference. Things are always kind of changing and always growing, and kind of new battles to fight in that regard as well. So yeah, so I think that definitely kind of fits the personality in that regard of yeah, maybe a status quo job, maybe um, yeah, it may be easier in that regard, right?
Hmm.
Kind of depending on what it is in the accounting world, there's obviously a lot of different avenues that you can go down in that regard.
So
But
we are
yeah, so it may be easier, but certainly not as enjoyable in that
yeah.
regard. I were just to be an accountant for Pepsi or some other larger corporation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. You'd just be
so,
lost in the shuffle.
right.
Yeah. So you said you have 24 clients that are not Augusta. So can any business or any individual use your services?
Uh, yeah, pretty well. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of those have just come. A lot of those clients, they come in from Mike's following on YouTube and so forth, like that as well. So yeah, I mean that's a fair amount of landscapers, pressure washers, other kind of, there. I think there's a pool business or two in there now,
Mhm.
as well. So yeah, it is kind of fun to see, as we're kind of expanding out into the general home services industry, a bit in that regard as well. And yeah, oh, and the other thing, I mean, it's obviously home service related, but I didn't realize until last week I had a call with somebody that's basically in the poop scoop business,
Mhm.
and all that out in the Midwest as well, and they were yeah, sharing about, I think he said there was like 800 members or whatnot in a school community, and whatnot
Wow.
for the business and all that, and I mean, I obviously knew they existed in that regard, right? But I didn't realize that yeah, I guess I didn't realize how just big that industry in particular was getting as well.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so you have these 24 businesses and all of those 24 business are growing. Plus how many franchisees are a part of what you're doing?
uh, let's see. So yeah, again, the franchisees would basically just be on the tax side of things as
Okay.
well. And yeah, I've crossed over 60 franchisees, in that regard as
Mhm.
well, that I'm kind of taking care of the taxes for. Um,
Yeah.
so
So
yeah,
that means with the amount that you have and you were trying to do by yourself, it is now May, so you just got through your spring rush, so to speak. In hindsight, what do you think you can learn for or be better, or what are you pivoting to change in the next season, you think?
gotcha. Yeah, I'd say certainly, one of the biggest areas would be, yeah, just kind of when it comes to overall kind of mapping out the season, as a whole, and then also just being able to, um, kind of that, but then also, kind of getting a bit more of a CRM, especially one that has a bit more of a client view, into kind
Mm,
of what's on in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's kind of a, hey, this is what I need from you, and there's automation follow-ups and all that
Mm-hmm.
to it as well. Just because the one that I have now, was basically kind of a portal that's through the software
Mm-hmm.
that I use, and all that as well, which was it was okay. It kind of does the job, and clients can upload their info, which
Mm-hmm.
is ultimately kind of what we need in the end of that regard. But being able to kind of have a centralized system where it's kind of every note and email and document is kind of all in one easy to reference place, as well as then the customer being able to see, like, okay, I submitted this, now the expectation of completion, is kind of this estimated date or whatnot, as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas currently with my systems, that was a little bit more of kind of a manual process in
Mm-hmm.
that regard, in terms of, okay, I see the documents come in, acknowledge that and kind of work through that. But yeah, there wasn't always clear expectations from the client end. It was just kind of be like, hey, your return is done, and here's kind of a review video kind of walking you through everything
Mm-hmm.
in that regard as well. So yeah, just being able to kind of have that system where it's kind of all centralized and everything is in one place
Mm-hmm.
will certainly help. Just kind of from a workflow standpoint.
Yeah.
In the process as well. So.
Yep. So what's your long-term vision for tax CPA, home service CPA?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's an area that I'm still thinking through a little bit in that regard, just in terms of kind of what we ultimately want that to look like long term. And that's that's an area that Mike has he's not necessarily going to pressure me one way or the other per se in that regard, in terms of whether we because essentially I can I mean, obviously Mike is a tremendous marketer and has a bit of a following and all that in that regard. So in the 4L framework, getting the leads isn't a problem.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
In that regard. But at the same time, you do have to kind of know your strengths and your skill set, to a degree in that regard as well. So that's kind of a decision that will need to be made, here probably in the coming months as well, in terms of, hey, do we want to try and really blow up home service CPA, and get hire on other staff members and all that, as we grow, or do we want to try and keep it a little bit more toward the we're not to the working GM model yet per se.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably still a little, like I said, it's on the tax side, it's just me, and I have bookkeeping help hired in that regard as well. But yeah, so I guess some analysis to be done in terms of what that looks like long term. But again, the nice thing is, from Mike's end, I haven't felt pressured from him one way or the other, in terms of like, hey, no, we need to get to 500 returns and 100 bookkeeping clients or something like that. There's none of that from Mike. It's kind of, being able to, kind of step back and then kind of try and figure out what fits the team best in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, obviously Mike cares about home service CPA, but it's not necessarily the main focus,
Right.
Augusta and Copilot and the media side of things are, and all that as well. So ultimately it's kind of, on me to try and help shape what that future looks like for home service CPA.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, is there anything that you would want to share with franchisees as well as others who will watch this about taxes, like a couple top tips on taxes that they need to watch for now into coming into the next year, the mistakes and the failures to do certain things that you saw in last year's group, what would you advise people to keep an eye on this coming year?
Gotcha. I'd say that certainly probably one of the biggest areas just to kind of work through a little bit in that regard would be, kind of particularly when it comes to depreciation and so forth, with your trucks and equipment. You kind of have the option whether you want to expense all of that this year or whether you want to spread that out over like a 5-year period or something like that, with trucks. So, usually in those scenarios, basically I run the numbers kind of both ways and, make a recommendation in that regard. But then ultimately it's, kind of up to the client, what direction they want to go in that regard as well. So yeah, so just kind of paying attention to that. As well as, something else that I'm kind of keeping an eye on down the road as well is, a lot of the, the initial Trump tax cuts and all that, as we're kind of past the first go around are set to expire at the end of 2025. And obviously they're going to be, kind of working toward, coming out with some new package or so forth, like that as well, for 2026 and going forward, as well. So yeah, I'm kind of paying a little bit more attention, to that side of things. Usually I don't necessarily dive into, all the ins and outs and every new idea and all that, as a lot of it's just talk, and arguably a lot of it still is at this point. But that certainly will have an impact, when it comes to like the bonus depreciation and, just what tax rates are and so forth like that as well. When all that comes down, that will certainly have an impact, going forward as well. And then kind of depending on what those decisions are may affect, what we want to do, kind of from a, that may impact your 2025 taxes in terms of what you want to do, some of the different choices there as well. So yeah, I'm keeping a little bit of a closer eye on, some of those potential happenings,
Yeah,
in that.
yeah, that's smart. What kind of continuing education does someone of your years of experience have to continue to do?
Yeah. So yeah, to maintain my CPA license here with Washington State, basically they require 40 hours a year of continuing education, and then you obviously have to get that education, and then you kind of report that, to the state licensing board and all that, each year, in that regard as well. Um, so yeah, it's kind of it's continuing education, so it's a kind of a continuing process in that regard as well. And one of
That's
the
good.
changes they made recently was, they used to basically say you needed 120 hours every 3 years, when the license would renew. Um, but then then they changed it, so that basically moved it from 120 every 3 to, basically requiring 40 every year, which I think is good, just because you did have, certainly by no means all, but you did have some CPAs that, kind of essentially tried to cram that into like, a 2 or 3 month period or something like that in season, and then it wasn't, maybe they weren't maybe getting the most out of it in that regard. It was just, trying to meet the requirement in that regard. Um, so now that they've, kind of have that and have that ongoing portion, of it, I think it's overall a good thing. So.
Yeah. So, what do you listen to or kind of feed on to make you the man of character that you are?
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess there's kind of a couple different, routes in that regard as well. Kind of randomly, I've actually, kind of started getting a little bit more into some of the kind of Gary Vaynerchuk, side of things a bit, in that regard as well, which, it seems like maybe that's a phase that people go through in that regard, for lack of a better way to phrase it. I mean, I obviously kind of, follow a lot of Alex's content and so forth like that as well. Um, but yeah, I don't know. There's something that kind of resonates, some of Gary's, content and so forth, and how kind of how all the algorithms work. Once you watch it
Yes.
twice, once you watch 2 videos, then it, automatically, kind of sends you to the third and fourth and so forth like that. In that regard as well. Um, so yeah, I know I know the style's not for everyone per se in that regard, but But yeah, it's kind of the kick I've been on lately, I guess you
That's
could say.
awesome.
So,
Yeah, that's good. He's coming back now. He's starting to do more podcasts and make himself more out there again. So it's going to be fun.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anything in closing that you want to share with our listeners, Augusta Nation? Anything that you have on your heart that you never get to put out there to anyone, but you wish you could tell?
Gotcha. Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's nothing that jumps right to the forefront of my mind in that regard.
That's okay.
It's definitely it's definitely fun, kind of being able to, interact with all the different clients and so forth, like that as well, and kind of see where they're at in their Augusta journey and all that as well.
Mhm.
Whether it's whether it's spoken or unspoken in that regard as well, just kind of from being able to see some of the numbers on the back end and, kind of see some of the growth, and so forth that, some of them are accomplishing is, it's a lot of fun. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today. I know you're a very busy man, and I want to let you get back to it. But thank you so much. We appreciate you sharing, and everybody will love to hear from you.
Perfect. Thank you, Liz. I enjoyed it.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you as well.